The first time I felt something was wrong was not when I saw the coffin being lowered into the ground. It was when my daughter-in-law collapsed against it, crying like she had lost the love of her life. Not her father-in-law, not my husband, the love of her life. I remember the sound of the dirt hitting the wood, a dull, hollow rhythm, thud, 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 each one landing in my chest like a slow drumbeat counting down the last seconds of the life I thought I had lived. The sky was pale that day, a washed-out blue, the kind that feels tired. The air smelled like cut grass and wilting flowers. Lilies, he hated lilies. My hands were steady, folded in front of me, black gloves pulled tight over fingers that had shaken for days and finally gone numb. People told me I was strong. I nodded when they said it because nodding was easier than speaking. Then she screamed. It wasn't loud at first. It came out of her as a broken sound, like air forced through glass. My daughter-in-law, Rachel, dropped to her knees beside the grave. My son reached for her, startled, embarrassed almost, trying to pull her back to her feet. She clutched the edge of the coffin instead. "I'm sorry," she cried. "I'm so sorry." Over and over, people whispered. Someone handed her a tissue. Another woman rubbed her back. I watched from 3 steps away, my heart slowing instead of racing. Grief is heavy, yes, but this felt different, too desperate, too personal. When she finally stood, her eyes met mine for half a second. Just one. They were red and swollen, but beneath that grief was something else. Fear. That was the first crack in the wall. Before all of this, before funerals and secrets and the kind of betrayal that changes how you remember your entire life, I had a simple world. Not perfect, but solid. My husband, Daniel, and I had been married for 42 years. We met at a hardware store when I couldn't reach a box of light bulbs, and he insisted on helping me, even after I told him 3 times I was managing just fine. He had that quiet confidence that didn't need to be loud. The kind of man who spoke gently but stood firmly. We built our life in a small house with cream-colored siding and a pecan tree in the backyard that dropped nuts every October like clockwork. He taught at the local community college. I worked part-time at the library. Evenings were quiet, soup simmering on the stove, the low murmur of the television, sometimes the soft tapping of his pen as he graded papers at the dining table. Our son, Stephen, was our only child. He had Daniel's calm and my stubbornness. When he told us he was dating someone seriously, I remember standing at the sink drying a plate, trying to pretend my hands weren't shaking. He brought Rachel home that Thanksgiving. She was polite, a little too careful with her words. Pretty in a soft way, long dark hair she kept tucked behind one ear, eyes that studied everything like she was memorizing it for later. She complimented my cooking twice, laughed at Daniel's dry jokes, and helped clear the table without being asked. That night when they left, Daniel said, "She's different." I asked what he meant. He hesitated. "I don't know, she carries herself like someone older." I brushed that off. Young women these days were confident, self-aware. It didn't mean anything. They married 2 years later. Rachel became part of our family in the way some people do, quietly, without forcing space, but always present. She called me Mom within 6 months. She brought Daniel homemade banana bread every Sunday. She asked him questions about his old photographs, his college days, his childhood. I should have noticed how often she asked about his past. I didn't. Daniel fell sick last winter. It came fast. A cough that turned into pneumonia. Pneumonia that revealed a heart condition we didn't know was there. 6 weeks, from diagnosis to goodbye. During those weeks, Rachel was everywhere. She drove me to the hospital when I couldn't trust my hands on the steering wheel. She brought Daniel clean sweaters. She sat at his bedside and read to him when he was too weak to hold a book, her voice steady, gentle. Once I woke from a doze in the hospital chair and found his hand in hers. I remember feeling grateful. That still makes me sick. The night he passed, Rachel sobbed harder than anyone in the room. She clung to the side of his bed as the nurses drew the curtain. I remember thinking, what a devoted daughter-in-law. I had no idea what that devotion truly meant. After the funeral, everyone went back to my house. The living room filled with the sounds of soft voices and clinking dishes. The smell of casseroles and coffee mixed with perfume and rain from damp coats. Stephen sat on the edge of the armchair, staring at the floor. Rachel hadn't left his side once, her fingers locked through his. I moved through the room like a shadow, answering questions, nodding when people spoke, accepting condolences that slid off me without leaving a mark. At some point, I went down the hallway toward the bathroom. Rachel's purse was on the bench beneath the family photos. It had tipped over, the contents half spilled. Lipstick, a small wallet, tissues, a phone charger, and a stack of photographs. I don't know why I picked them up. Maybe it was instinct. Maybe it was that look in her eyes at the grave. The first photo showed a younger Rachel, barely more than a teenager. She stood beside a man whose face I knew better than my own reflection. Daniel. He looked younger, yes, but unmistakably him. His posture, his crooked smile. The faint scar near his eyebrow from when Stephen was little and threw a toy too hard. My breath vanished. My fingers trembled as I slid to the next photo. Rachel and Daniel at a lake, sitting close, too close. Another, Rachel in a graduation gown. Daniel in the background, proud, almost radiant. The room tilted. I sank onto the bench, the hallway narrowing around me. Voices drifted from the living room, distant and distorted. My ears rang. My heart thudded like it was trying to escape. The dates were written on the backs. 5 years before she ever met my son, my husband, my daughter-in-law. My hands started to shake so hard I had to press the photos against my chest to keep them from rattling. Everything I thought I knew about my marriage, my family, my life, it shifted sideways in a single breath. Behind me, I heard Rachel's voice, soft, close. Mom. Rachel's voice behind me made my entire body stiffen. Mom. I turned too quickly. The photos slipped from my hands, scattering onto the hallway floor like fallen leaves. Rachel followed my gaze. For a split second, the blood drained from her face. That was all the proof I needed. She dropped to her knees, gathering the pictures with shaking hands, stacking them too neatly, too carefully. The silence between us grew thick and unbearable. I was just cleaning out my old purse, she said softly. I didn't realize those were still in there. I couldn't speak yet. My heart had begun to pound so violently I was afraid she could hear it. Finally, I whispered, "How long?" Her hands froze on the last photo. Rachel's eyes lifted slowly to mine. For the first time since I had known her, she looked small, cornered. "Longer than you think," she said. The living room noises seemed miles away now. Laughter drifted faintly down the hall. Someone thanked another person for bringing pie. My husband had been buried not an hour ago. I stood up slowly. My legs felt weak, but something inside me sharpened, hardened. "We'll talk later," I said. Rachel nodded, relief washing over her face too quickly. "Yes, later." I walked past her without another word and locked myself in the bathroom. I turned on the sink just so I could breathe without being heard. I leaned over the counter and stared at my reflection. The woman in the mirror looked calm. Inside, everything was breaking. That night, after the house emptied and the casseroles were stacked in mismatched containers, Stephen and Rachel stayed in the guest room. I lay in my bed alone for the first time in 42 years. The mattress creaked differently without Daniel's weight beside me. Sleep never came. Every memory replayed itself with new meaning. Rachel laughing too hard at Daniel's stories. Rachel sitting too close on the couch. Rachel crying too deeply at the hospital. All of it twisted now, poisonous in hindsight. Around 3 in the morning, I slipped from the bed and padded down the hallway. Their door was closed. Light spilled out from beneath it. I raised my hand to knock, then stopped myself. I wasn't ready, not yet. The days after the funeral moved like thick syrup. Rachel stayed at my house constantly. She cleaned. She cooked. She folded Daniel's clothes with trembling care. She brought me tea I never drank. Stephen hovered between us, clueless, smiling too often like he was trying to force normal back into place. On the 4th day, Rachel approached me while Stephen was showering. "I know what you must be thinking," she said gently. I folded a towel with slow precision. "Do you?" She swallowed. Daniel was important to me. I looked at her then. Important how? Her eyes flickered away. He helped me through a very dark time. That's not what those photographs showed. Rachel's shoulders slumped. "We were close." "Close," I echoed. "You were a teenager." She flinched at that. "I'm not proud of it," she said. "But he was kind to me. He listened when no one else did." I waited. She didn't continue. "You married my son," I said. "Did he know you had already loved his father?" That word finally broke her composure. Loved. Rachel's breath came out in a sob. It wasn't like that. The denial was automatic, practiced. I studied her face, every tremor, every twitch of her hands. "Then tell me what it was," I said. But before she could answer, Stephen entered the room, towel around his shoulders, hair wet. "Everything okay?" he asked. Rachel smiled too brightly. "Yes." I said nothing. The truth didn't come all at once, it leaked. Tiny drops at first. Days later, I found an old envelope hidden inside a book Daniel used to read. It contained money transfers, small, consistent amounts sent to Rachel years before she ever met Stephen. Then I found emails, hidden in his old laptop, carefully archived, polite at first, professional, then warm, then personal. Then intimate in the way only two people hiding something can be, never explicit, but devastating all the same. When I confronted Rachel again, she didn't lie anymore. "We met when I was 19, she whispered. "At the library." I froze. My library. "I was attending night classes," she said. "He was giving a lecture series." "And you sought him out?" She nodded. "I was homeless. I had no one. He helped me." And then her voice broke. "Then feelings happened." "No, then betrayal happened." "You slept with my husband," I said. She didn't deny it. For the first time, I felt something other than grief. Anger, hot, controlled, frighteningly calm anger. "And my son?" I asked. "Did you choose him because of his father?" She hesitated. That hesitation told me everything. "I didn't plan it," she said. "But when I met Stephen, I couldn't ignore how similar he was. It felt like a second chance at a normal life. A second chance built on my ruins." Stephen learned the truth 2 weeks later, not from me, from Rachel. Her confession came with sobbing apologies and half-truths carefully wrapped to minimize the horror. He stood in my kitchen afterward, knuckles white against the counter. "Did you know?" he asked. I nodded. He looked like a stranger in that moment. A child again, lost, furious, heartbroken. "How long?" He whispered. "All of it," I said. His breath hitched. "My father?" "I know," I said. "No," he said hoarsely. "You don't, because I don't even know who he was anymore." That night, Stephen packed a bag and left. Rachel stayed behind. And that is when the real battle began. She begged at first, then she defended herself, then she blamed me. "You were distant," she said one evening, tears streaking her face. "You didn't understand him like I did." I laughed, not loudly, just once, soft, dangerously calm. "You were a girl he should have protected," I said, "not used." Her sobbing stopped. "I loved him," she whispered. I felt nothing. Weeks passed. Stephen wouldn't return my calls. The town began to whisper. People noticed the tension, the changed behavior. The way Rachel stopped appearing at church with me, the way Stephen moved out into a rented apartment without explanation. Secrets rot when exposed to sunlight, and I was done shielding them. The town did what small towns always do when silence becomes suspicious. It watched. At the grocery store, women who once lingered to chat now fell quiet when I reached for apples. At church, people hugged me a second too long, as if trying to draw answers out through my coat. I heard my name in hushed tones once when I passed the bakery. "Poor thing," someone said. "Still not over the grief," another replied. "If only they knew." Rachel moved out of my house quietly one afternoon while I was at the library. She left a note on the kitchen table. "I don't want to cause more pain." I stared at the words for a long time, as if pain were a switch she could turn off. Stephen didn't return my calls. When I went to his apartment once, the lights were on, but the door never opened. I stood in that hallway with my palm resting against the wood, listening to the faint hum of a television inside. He was breathing on the other side, and he still wouldn't let me in. The nights were the worst. Daniel's absence had weight now, not just grief, but truth pressing down on everything. I found myself sitting in his old chair more than once, staring at the walls like answers might emerge from the paint. Every memory twisted. Our anniversaries, his late evenings, the sudden interest in library events. I had mistaken secrecy for dedication. I had mistaken guilt for fatigue. One evening, I pulled out his old winter coat to donate it. My fingers brushed something stiff inside the lining. A folded photograph. It showed Rachel and Daniel standing beneath the lanterns at the old park downtown. Both of them were smiling softly. His arm was around her waist. There was a note on the back in his handwriting. She deserved better than the world gave her. I tore the photo in half with hands that didn't shake at all. Rachel called 3 days later. "I need to explain everything," she said. "Please?" I didn't answer. She knocked anyway that evening. Her eyes were swollen. She looked smaller than I remembered her, wrapped in a coat too thin for the cold. "I need to make things right," she said. I stepped aside. She sat on the edge of the couch where she once curled up with my husband, her hands twisted in her lap. "He never planned to leave you," she began. "It wasn't like that." "It was already like that," I said. She winced. "It started wrong." "I see that now. I was barely an adult. I needed help. He was there when no one else was." "He was married," I said. "Yes," she whispered. "And I hated myself for loving him." The honesty startled me. "How long?" I asked. "Almost 8 years." 8 years, that number echoed inside me. So while my son was dating you, I said slowly, you were still grieving my husband. Her shoulders shook. Yes. Something cold settled beneath my ribs. You didn't just betray me, I said. You built a life on a lie. She looked up, eyes wet. Stephen saved me from that life. You made him part of it. I loved him for real, she insisted. Love doesn't grow in the shadow of deception. She covered her face and cried. I didn't comfort her. The next morning I drove to the cemetery alone. The soil had settled slightly since the funeral. The flowers were wilting, petals browning at the edges. I sat on the cold metal bench and folded my scarf tighter around my throat. How could you? I whispered to the stone. There was no answer, only wind through dead leaves. Stephen finally called that night. I found the emails, he said abruptly. His voice sounded hollow. I'm so sorry, I said. There was silence on the line. I think I need space, he said quietly, from both of you. My heart folded in on itself. I understand, I said. The lie hurt no one but me. Weeks passed. Rachel filed for divorce. The legal paperwork arrived at my doorstep by mistake the first time. I held the envelope without opening it, feeling the finality of it pulse beneath my thumb. The town shifted its whispers. Now it wasn't just grief they sensed, it was scandal. At first, no one dared name it. Then a woman from church approached me in the parking lot. Is it true? She asked softly. Is what true? I asked. That she had history with Daniel. My hands tightened around my purse. Yes, her face drained of color. I'm so sorry, she said. Word traveled faster after that. Rachel stopped coming to town. Stephen stayed away, and I lived in the middle of the wreckage, sweeping around the remains of 2 broken marriages and 1 shattered identity. One afternoon, an older woman from the college arrived at my door. I worked with Daniel, she said gently. And I thought you should know he wasn't always the man you thought. She handed me a sealed envelope. He kept this in his office. Inside was a letter addressed to me. For the first time since the funeral, my hands shook. I betrayed you long before I ever admitted it to myself. If you are reading this, I have lost the chance to face what I did. I don't expect forgiveness, only for you to know I was wrong. I folded the letter slowly. Truth has a way of arriving too late. The final piece came unexpectedly. One afternoon, Rachel returned. I'm leaving town, she said. Permanently? I nodded. That's wise. She hesitated at the door. He loved you, she said. So you keep saying, I replied. He never meant to hurt you. Intent doesn't erase damage. Her shoulders sagged. I was young, she whispered. So was my marriage once, I said. She left without another word. That evening, Stephen came home for the first time. We sat at the kitchen table for a long time without speaking. The clock ticked loudly against the silence. I don't know what to do with all of this, he finally said. Neither do I admitted. But we'll learn, I added. He nodded slowly. And that was when I realized something quietly heartbreaking and strangely freeing. The truth hadn't destroyed just one life. It had forced 3 of us to begin again from ruins. Stephen stayed the night. It was the first time he had slept under the same roof as me since he found out. I left the hallway light on for him like I used to when he was a teenager. Some habits cling to you even after your world breaks apart. We didn't speak much before bed. Grief had layered itself between us, not loud, not dramatic, just heavy and shared. I heard him moving in the guest room long after midnight, drawers opening. A soft thump as he sat on the edge of the bed, the faint sound of his breathing when he finally lay down. I stayed awake. There was something I hadn't told him yet. Not because I wanted to protect anyone, but because I hadn't been ready to watch the last piece of his father fall apart. The money, the hidden transfers, the quiet help that had stretched on for years like a second, invisible marriage. Morning came softly. Pale light slid through the kitchen window. I brewed coffee and waited for the kettle to scream because silence had started to feel dangerous. Stephen emerged, eyes tired. Did he ever talk about her? He asked suddenly. The question hung between us like smoke. No, I said honestly. Not as she truly was. He nodded once as if he already knew that answer. I set 2 cups on the table. There's something else, I said, his body tensed. I retrieved the envelope with the bank statements. I placed it between us like a fragile truth that could shatter if handled wrong. He flipped through them slowly. His jaw tightened. He didn't yell. He didn't cry. He just stared at the numbers on the page like they were rearranging his understanding of his own childhood. All this time, he whispered, He was sending her money, yes, and she still married me, yes. The silence stretched. I feel like I was used, he said quietly, like I was some kind of replacement. The pain in his voice was sharper than any anger I had heard from him. I don't know what she felt, I said, but I know you were real, you were never a stand-in. He pressed his forehead into his hands. I loved her, he murmured, I know. That was the moment I saw my son truly break, not loudly, but completely. Rachel's disappearance from town didn't mean her shadow left with her. People started to look at me differently, some with sympathy, some with curiosity, a few with judgment that tried to disguise itself as concern. I kept my head down. At the library, I returned to work, reshelving books with calm precision. The paper scent settled my nerves. The rhythm of routine stitched small pieces of me back together each day. One afternoon, a teenage girl asked me where the psychology section was. For a split second, I saw Rachel at 19 in her eyes, small, lost, needing someone trustworthy. My chest tightened. I pointed her in the right direction and went into the back room to breathe. A month after Rachel left town, I received a letter in the mail. No return address. I recognized the handwriting instantly. I don't expect forgiveness. I only want you to understand how it happened. I folded the letter once and placed it in a drawer. Understanding was a gift given too late. Stephen struggled quietly. He went to work, paid his rent. Met me once a week for dinner. Grief sat in his posture now, in the way his shoulders curved inward. One evening he asked, "Do you hate her?" I stirred my soup slowly. "No," I answered after a moment. "I don't have the energy for hatred anymore." He studied me. "Do you hate him?" My breath caught. "I loved your father," I said, "but I no longer defend him." He nodded slowly. That was enough. The public reckoning came unexpectedly. At the spring fundraiser for the library, a woman raised her glass during the donation speech. "To new beginnings," she said pointedly, "and to the strength of women who survive betrayal." There were murmurs. All eyes turned to me. I felt heat rise to my face, but I stood. "Thank you," I said simply. That was all they needed. The truth was now public property. Rachel would never outrun it, neither would his memory. Weeks later, Stephen received final divorce papers. He didn't cry when he signed them. "She took nothing," he said. "She said she didn't deserve it." I didn't answer that. Deserving had nothing to do with what she had already taken. One evening, a knock came at my door, unexpected. Rachel stood on the porch, thinner, paler. Her eyes held a calm I hadn't seen before. "I'm going to counseling," she said without greeting. I needed to face what I did. I studied her in silence. "I don't want your forgiveness," she added. "I only wanted you to know that I finally told the full truth to myself." "For once," I said. She nodded. "I never meant to destroy anyone's life," she whispered. "But you did," I replied. She accepted that. "I won't contact Stephen again." "That would be mercy," I said. Tears filled her eyes. She turned and left. I visited Daniel's grave again that week. I brought no flowers. "Only honesty. You lived 2 lives," I said quietly, "and in doing so you ruined 3. Wind moved through the grass. No absolution came, only distance. Time passed. Stephen began to soften, not toward Rachel, but toward life. He laughed once at dinner over a ridiculous story about his coworker. The sound startled us both. I smiled back. In that moment I saw that healing wouldn't be loud either. It would arrive quietly, in breath, in routine, in small return joys. The hardest part of betrayal is not the anger. It's the silence that follows after the anger has nowhere left to go. Life settled into a strange, fragile calm after Rachel's final visit. The house felt lighter without her presence, but emptier too. Daniel's absence still echoed in the rooms, but now there was also the hollow space where the version of my life I thought was real used to live. Stephen came for dinner every Sunday. Not out of obligation, out of need. We didn't talk about Rachel anymore. Her name became something unspoken that still lingered in the air between us, like a bruise you avoid touching but always feel. Instead, we spoke about small, ordinary things: work, bills, the weather. And sometimes, without either of us meaning to, Daniel would come up in conversation the way old habits do. When that happened, the room went quiet. One night, after washing the dishes together in wordless rhythm, Stephen finally said it. "I don't know how to remember him." The water ran between my fingers. "I don't either," I admitted. "He was a good father," Stephen said, "but not a good husband." The truth settled somewhere between us. Both things could exist at the same time. 3 months after the divorce, Stephen told me he was seeing a therapist. I didn't want to be like him, he said quietly. I needed help understanding everything before I ever tried to love again. Pride swelled in my chest, not loud, just steady. One afternoon, a letter arrived from Rachel's attorney. No demands, no threats, just a statement of separation from any shared claims connected to Daniel, including the small trust he had secretly created. Rachel had removed herself entirely. Stephen handed the papers back to me quietly. She really left everything behind, he said. Some debts can't be repaid with money, I replied. The quiet action I took next wasn't loud, it wasn't dramatic, but it changed something deep inside me. I scheduled an appointment with a lawyer of my own. Daniel's estate had been simple on the surface: house, savings, retirement, but the hidden transfers to Rachel had complicated things in ways I hadn't yet faced. I wasn't interested in vengeance. I wanted truth. The lawyer reviewed everything in careful silence. Your husband committed financial deception, she said finally. But legally there is little to recover now. The funds are gone. I didn't come here for money, I said. She raised her brows slightly. I came to reclaim my name. The process took months: documents, affidavits, final disclosures. They added formal language to informal betrayal. But when it was done, the growing legal footnote attached to Daniel's history was no longer only whispered between neighbors. It was recorded, permanent. Truth has weight when it becomes official. The town reacted slowly. Some people nodded with new understanding when they passed me. Others became awkward, unsure of what could now be said aloud. I kept walking the same paths: the bakery, the library, the quiet bench in the park where Daniel once took his afternoon walks. None of those places belonged to the lie alone. They belonged to my life too. One evening, Stephen came over earlier than usual. There's someone at work, he said. The way he said it, carefully, cautiously, told me everything. Is she kind? I asked. He nodded. Very. Then that's all you need to start with. He hesitated. I was scared you'd think it was too soon. I smiled gently. Healing doesn't follow grief's timeline, it follows its own. That was the first time I saw hope fully return to his eyes. That night, alone in my room, I opened the drawer where I had placed Rachel's letter months ago. I read it for the first time. It was long, detailed, painful. She wrote about being 19 and invisible, about homelessness, about Daniel being the first man to treat her like she mattered, about feeling trapped in a love she recognized as wrong but couldn't leave, about marrying Stephen in desperation to escape the shadow of the man she never truly left behind. She didn't justify it, she owned it. I stole stability from you, she wrote, and I stole a future from your son before he ever had the chance to protect it. When I reached the end, I folded the pages slowly. I cried for the girl she had been, not the woman she became. Compassion is not forgiveness, but it is proof that bitterness no longer rules you. Stephen introduced me to his new friend 2 months later. We met for lunch. Her name was Penelope. She was gentle without being timid, curious without being invasive. She asked me about the library, about my hobbies, about my favorite kind of soup. She never asked about Rachel, and that told me everything I needed to know about her character. When she reached for Stephen's hand under the table, he didn't flinch. I felt my chest loosen for the first time in a long while. Later that evening, as I walked past the old pecan tree in my yard, I realized something had shifted inside me. I no longer flinched at Daniel's memory. I still felt sadness. But it was honest sadness now, not poisoned by illusion. Love can be real even when it's broken, but trust, once shattered, changes the shape of everything. The final step of my own quiet action came without warning. One morning I packed Daniel's remaining clothes, not in anger, not in ritual, just in purpose. I donated them to a shelter across town. When I handed the boxes over, the woman behind the desk smiled warmly. Thank you, she said. You'd be surprised how much a warm coat can change someone's life. I thought of Rachel at 19. Cold, alone, needing help, and I said softly, I know. That night I slept deeply for the first time in over a year. No dreams, no ghosts, just rest. The town never held a formal trial for what happened in my family. It didn't need to. Judgment, in places like ours, moves quietly through whispers, glances, and carefully chosen silences. By the time summer arrived, most people knew what Rachel had been to Daniel, and what Daniel had kept hidden from me for nearly a decade. Some truths arrive like storms, others like slow poison. This was the second kind. I felt it at church first. The pews didn't change, the hymns didn't change, the preacher's voice didn't waver, but the air did. Women who used to cluster near me now hesitated, some avoided eye contact. Others offered tight smiles that carried both sympathy and discomfort. One Sunday, during the passing of the peace, a woman leaned in and whispered, "I don't know how you're still standing." I whispered back, "I don't either." The truth was, I had stopped standing on pride. I was standing on survival. The real public consequence began when the college announced they were establishing a quiet internal review regarding Daniel's past conduct. No scandalized headlines, no dramatic accusations, just a careful inquiry fueled by what had become impossible to ignore. A former colleague stopped me in the library one afternoon. "I wish we'd known," she said softly. "Maybe we would have seen things differently." I nodded. "Maybe, but maybe isn't a shield." Stephen faced his own reckoning at work. Someone had recognized Rachel's name on old university records and connected it to our family. The rumor mill found him easily. One afternoon, he came to my house visibly shaken. "They didn't accuse me," he said. "They just looked at me different." I put a hand over his. "You didn't commit the sin," I said, "but you are allowed to feel the shadow." His eyes filled. "I hate that his choices still follow me." "I know," I said, "but shadows move when you walk forward." Penelope remained steady. She never pressed Stephen about his past. She never demanded proof of safety where suspicion still lived. Instead, she showed up. To dinners, to late work nights with packed lunches, to Sunday walks with awkward but genuine warmth. One evening, while Stephen was in the garage, she sat beside me on the porch. "I don't want to replace anyone," she said carefully, "but I do want to build something honest." The word honest landed softly but powerfully. "That's how you protect love," I said. She nodded, eyes shining. The most difficult confrontation came quietly. At the market. I was selecting peaches when I felt someone step beside me. It was Daniel's old friend, Harold, fishing buddy, poker night companion, a man who had toasted our anniversaries and asked about my garden. "I wish you had told me," he said. "Told you what?" I asked. "That he was struggling." The implication stung. "I didn't know," I said. He shifted uncomfortably. "I think a part of me always wondered," he admitted, but Daniel never gave us reason to push. There it was, the truth people avoid, the danger of not asking. By midsummer, Rachel's absence became permanent in the town's imagination. Someone said she'd moved across the state. Someone else claimed she'd gone back to school. No one truly knew, and after a while no one really cared. Scandal fades faster than grief. Then, unexpectedly, the college reached out to me. They wanted to archive Daniel's personal files connected to the inquiry. They asked if I wished to add a personal statement to be stored alongside his professional record. For 3 days, I stared at the blank page. What does a wife write when her husband's legacy splits in two? I didn't write as a victim. I didn't write as a judge. I wrote as a witness. He taught with patience. He failed with secrecy. Both truths existed in the same man. That was all. The following week, the town paper printed a small notice, former professor's records under historical review. No names, no accusations, just acknowledgement. Daniel's reputation shifted, not destroyed, but clarified, and that, oddly enough, felt like justice. The real public consequence, though, arrived not through rumor or paperwork, but through Stephen. At a local fair that same month, he stood beside Penelope at a booth selling handmade bracelets for charity. I watched from a distance as children laughed and neighbors passed. Rachel wasn't remembered there. Daniel wasn't discussed. What mattered was that my son stood in sunlight again without shame. That was the truest consequence of all. The weight passed to the guilty and lifted from the innocent. Later that evening, Stephen walked beside me toward the car. "I used to think the whole town was watching me," he said. "And now," I asked. "Now I think they're watching whether I survive it," he replied. I smiled softly. "Then give them something brave to witness." When autumn arrived, I visited the cemetery one last time before winter. The leaves gathered thick on the ground this time. I brushed them away from the stone and stood quietly. "I no longer wrestle your memory," I said. "I simply carry it without illusion." The wind passed low across the grass. That was enough. The public had seen enough. Now it was time for private rebuilding. By the time winter settled in for good, the house felt different. Not emptier, not fuller, just honest. The air no longer carried the tension of unsaid things. The rooms no longer echoed with questions I was afraid to ask myself. What remained was quieter than the life I used to live, but steadier than I'd ever expected it could be again. Stephen spent Christmas Eve with me for the first time since the divorce. Penelope joined us late in the afternoon, bringing a pie she'd baked with her own nervous hands. I could see it in the way she held the dish too tightly, the way she kept smoothing the edge of her sweater like she was afraid of leaving the wrong impression. She didn't need to be afraid. Grief had taught me how fragile courage really is. At dinner, Stephen reached for her hand under the table just as he once had with Rachel. For a split second, my chest tightened. The past leaned in, but then Penelope glanced at him with open affection, not secrecy, not guilt, and the past stepped back again. After dessert, Stephen lingered in the doorway while Penelope put her coat on. "Mom," he said softly, "I think I'm finally ready to breathe again." The words were simple, but I felt their weight travel all the way through me. "I see that," I said. "And I'm proud of you." He hugged me longer than usual. In January, something unexpected happened. I received a letter from Rachel, not long, not defensive, just 3 pages. She told me she had enrolled in a counseling program, that she was working nights at a care facility. That she finally understood the depth of what she had done, not just to me, but to the girl she once was. "I spent years blaming my past," she wrote, "but I've learned that pain only explains behavior, it never excuses it." I folded the letter slowly. For the first time since everything had shattered, I felt something soften inside me. Not forgiveness, understanding without surrender. That same week, Stephen proposed to Penelope, quietly, at the lake, the same lake where I found one of those unbearable photographs months before. This time, the sky was clear. No shadows, only water and honest promise. When he told me, I felt tears rise instantly. "Will you be part of it?" he asked carefully. I smiled. "Only if it's simple," he laughed. "You always liked simple." Wedding preparations began slowly, no rush, no spectacle. Just intent. I watched my son grow gentler with each passing week, more sure of himself, more open with what hurt instead of burying it. One afternoon, as we sat sorting through guest lists, he hesitated. "My father's side of the family," he began. I met his eyes. "Invite who your heart feels safe with?" He nodded. "Thank you for not asking me to erase him." Healing doesn't demand erasure, it demands honesty. I visited the library less often that spring. I decided to take early retirement. Not because I was tired of books, but because I felt called to be present for the life rebuilding around me. Stephen teased me gently about it. "You're becoming dangerously free," he joked. I smiled. I earned it. The wedding was held in late May beneath a canopy of soft white cloth and wildflowers. No mention of the past, no edge of scandal, only sunlight and vows spoken carefully and without illusion. Penelope looked at Stephen as though he was not a replacement for anyone, but simply the man she chose in full awareness. When it came time for me to speak quietly with her before the ceremony, she took my hands and said, "I know I can never fill the space of what was lost, but I promise I will never build anything on a lie." That was the only promise I needed. As they exchanged vows, I watched my son's face. There was no fear in it, only choice. And that is what love should be, chosen, not inherited from secrets, not born of shadows. After the ceremony, as laughter filled the garden and glasses clinked gently in the warm air, I stepped away for a moment and sat beneath the old pecan tree behind my house. The same tree that had watched my marriage grow. The same tree that had dropped its leaves in grief months ago. Now its branches were heavy with new green. Stephen found me there. "You okay?" he asked. I nodded. "I'm finally at peace." He sat beside me in silence. For the first time in a very long time, silence didn't feel dangerous. That night, when the house grew quiet again and newlyweds drove away wrapped in the first glow of their honest life together, I stood alone in my bedroom. I opened the drawer where Daniel's letter once rested. It was empty now. I had already placed it in the fire earlier that evening, not in anger, not in ceremony, just in closure. The ashes cooled slowly like memory. I slept peacefully that night, no dreams, just rest. The morning after Stephen's wedding, I woke before the sun. The house was quiet in a way that felt earned, not empty. Through the open window, I could hear birds in the pecan tree, soft, persistent, alive. The air smelled faintly of leftover candles and cut grass from the night before. For the first time in a long while, I didn't wake with dread in my chest. I lay still for a few moments, listening to my own breathing, feeling how steady it sounded. Healing doesn't arrive like a celebration. It arrives like this, slow, quiet, almost shy. When I stepped into the kitchen, I found a note on the table. "Mom, we're starting our drive this morning. Thank you for everything. I love you." Stephen, I pressed the paper to my chest and closed my eyes. Love had survived, not untouched, but alive. Later that day, I did something I had been quietly postponing for months. I went through the last remaining box of Daniel's things, not his clothes, not his books, but the small personal items no one ever thinks about at first: his old watch, the cracked leather wallet, a handful of faded receipts, the postcard he once brought back from a work trip and never mailed. I sat on the floor and let the items spill around me. Memory doesn't come all at once. It arrives in waves. Daniel's laugh, his hands steady on the steering wheel, the way he used to hum without realizing it when he washed dishes. The man he was, the man he hid, both belonged to the truth now. I didn't cry this time. I didn't need to. Grief had softened into recognition. Love had matured into understanding. Betrayal had settled into memory without power. I placed the watch into a donation box, not as punishment, as release. That afternoon, I returned to the cemetery one last time. The headstone stood quiet and unchanged, but the ground around it was covered with fresh grass now. Life had already begun to grow back over the place where everything once ended. I stood there without speaking, for a long while. Then I bowed my head, not in surrender, not in accusation, but in calm acceptance. We carry the living forward, not the dead backward, and I walked away without turning back. That summer passed gently. I spent slow mornings on the porch with warm tea between my palms. I began volunteering twice a week at the shelter downtown, the same one where I had donated Daniel's coats. I didn't tell anyone who I was or where I came from. I simply listened, to girls who had nowhere to sleep, to women who had trusted the wrong man, to mothers who didn't know how to forgive themselves yet. I never gave advice unless they asked. Sometimes being heard is the first kind of healing that ever arrives. One afternoon at the shelter, a young woman approached me quietly. "Why do you come here?" she asked. I looked at her gently. "Because someone once needed help and didn't know how to ask properly," I said, "and others paid the price for that silence." She nodded slowly, as if she understood more than I had explained. Stephen called every Sunday from the road, him and Penelope traveling together in small, hopeful circles across the map. National parks, quiet inns, sunsets that felt earned. He sounded lighter, not erased of pain, but no longer ruled by it. One evening he said something that stayed with me. "I think I finally understand something," he told me. "What's that?" "That love only survives in the open, secrets kill it slowly." "Yes," I said, "they always have. Rachel never wrote again. I didn't need her to. Her story no longer lived inside me." That space had closed quietly, the way deep wounds eventually do, not with noise but with careful time. On my birthday that fall, Stephen and Penelope surprised me with a small gathering under the pecan tree. Just family, just food, just soft laughter. No speeches, no painful anniversaries, only presence. At the end of the evening, Stephen wrapped me in a long hug and whispered, "Thank you for staying." Tears filled my eyes. Staying is sometimes the bravest thing left to do. That night, I sat alone at my desk and opened the old wooden box where I once kept photos of my life. I removed the images that no longer represented truth, not out of anger, out of honesty. I added new ones, Stephen smiling on his wedding day, Penelope standing beside him, steady and real, the pecan tree heavy with leaves again. Life does not stop after betrayal, but it does require you to live differently afterward, more carefully, more awake, more truthfully. I often think back to that day at the cemetery, the sound of dirt hitting wood, the scream that didn't belong to duty alone, the moment that began the unraveling of everything I thought I knew. If I could speak to that woman standing there in black gloves and numb shock, I would tell her this: you will survive this, not unchanged, but unbroken. The truth will hurt, the truth will heal, the truth will set your son free. And one day you will breathe again without fear of what memory might bring. People sometimes ask me now if I regret learning the truth about my husband. I always answer the same way. No, I regret what he chose, but I don't regret knowing it. Because lies don't protect love, they only delay its collapse. And truth, no matter how cruel it feels at the start, is still the only thing that can rebuild what was destroyed. So if you're listening to my story right now and you're standing in your own version of that cemetery, if you're staring at a truth you weren't ready to face, if betrayal has torn your understanding of the past apart, I want you to hear this: you are not weak for being wounded. You are strong for surviving revelation. And healing will come not all at once, not with applause, but in small, quiet ways that reshape you without asking permission. Would you have looked at those photos and spoken up, or would you have turned away? Tell me in the comments. And if this story touched something real inside you, stay with me. There are more truths to tell, more healings to witness, more lives still learning how to begin again.